Okay, we're gonna start off looking at fluid checks, and we're gonna do it first on our manual transmission car. You have to do two different vehicles, manual transmission and an automatic. So this is our manual. So if you come up here, I'm gonna show you a couple different things. So our first one on here is windshield washer fluid. So we look for our windshield washer, which happens to be over here. And you can see here that it's got a little line that goes across, and then you can see that the blue comes all the way up to the top. Now you want to make sure that there's actually fluid in there, because after a while these things become stained blue. And if you look down inside there, you can see that the level is completely up to the top. Make sure you put this back in here. This little filter helps keep garbage from getting inside there, and it only takes the smallest thing to plug up one of those windshield wiper sprayers. Alright, so our windshield wiper fluid level is good. So we're going to mark good, and you notice that it was a nice bright blue color, so it really doesn't need to be serviced or replaced. Now let's take a look at the power steering fluid. Our power steering fluid on this car is over here. You got this see-through plastic container, and you see there's a min line or minimum down here, and you'll notice it says when hot. Minimum when hot and maximum. Our car is cold right now, so you want to actually read this part over here where it says cold. And now over here you can see that it also has a min line being this bottom one and a max line being the top one. So for a cold car, this is exactly where it should be. However, we need to also check the quality of our fluid to see what we've got. Here's where we run into a little bit of a problem, because unfortunately we can't see in here very well and decide if that's good fluid or bad fluid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take something like a screwdriver, and I'm going to get a little bit of fluid on this, and I'm going to put it on a white piece of paper. So I'm going to dip this in here, get a couple drops out, and I'm going to put this on a piece of paper. Now if you remember our brake fluids from our fluid chapter, it should be nice and bright red. This is really getting kind of old. You can see this is more of a tannish color and not so red. So this actually needs service. It's at the right level, but it could use replacement. So after we check that, we're going to make sure our cap goes back on correctly, and we'll mark it over here. So power steering fluid, the level is good, but it needs servicing, and it probably needs to be replaced. Alright, let's take a look at our engine oil level. For that, the car should have been running, and it should be sitting for at least 5 minutes before you actually check the oil level. So we're going to pull out our dipstick, and the first thing we're going to do is ignore what it says and clean it off. Then we can investigate it a little bit to see what it says. So you can see we got these little hash marks here that go up and down, and you've got an L for low and an F for full. So it should be somewhere in these hash marks when we get a reading. So now that we've cleaned off the dipstick, we're going to put it back into the hole, make sure that it goes all the way into the engine. Okay, don't just leave it there, make sure it goes all the way down in seats. Pull it back out, and we're going to take a look at our level. Okay, so you can see here actually that our engine actually has a little too much oil in it, and then it's above the full line. So in this case, it's actually very hard to remove a small amount of oil. It's really important when you fill up a car not to overfill it. So this is a little over full, so really we should drain this back out and replace it. Also notice the color of the oil. Notice how this is a nice amber color and not black. This is very good oil. This is probably brand new fresh oil. Okay, so now we've got our oil level checked. And we can mark off on here that our oil level was good, but it needs servicing because it was too full. So we're just going to mark that down. Okay? Now let's look at our coolant system, and this one is tricky because there are several ways you can look at the engine coolant level. Okay, this is an older car, so we can actually see the radiator of the car, and we can see the radiator cap. Now remember, never open one of these when it's hot, but if you want, you can check in here by simply turning this, pulling this off, and looking down inside. Now you'll notice here that the coolant is all the way to the top. It's bright green. It looks really good. However, we're going to find that there's actually a different story here. We close this back up, and we come over to the coolant recovery box. Now this is where the radiator fluid goes while the car is running. When it gets hot, some of that coolant comes in here, and some of it stays in the radiator. Now we can look on here, and you'll see that there's actually a full line right here where my finger's at, and you'll notice you don't see any green coolant. Okay, so this is actually a little bit low for this car, and if you were to look down even further, you would see there's a low line down here, and that low line is where you finally start to see green coolant. So really, this car is actually low on coolant, and you should fill it up till that comes up to the full line here. And if you look down inside, you would see that it is actually quite low, and you need to add some coolant in this car. So maybe a couple quarts of coolant would fill that up to the proper level. So you can't always trust what you see under the radiator cap as being full. So we come back over to our chart, and we'd part down. It was bright green, so we know that it's good in color, but it needs servicing because it was too low. Alright, let's take a look at our brake fluid level and at our clutch fluid level at the same time. Okay, so over here is our brake fluid. Remember, this is always in line with the steering wheel. Okay? So we're looking outside here, and if you look over here, there is a max line, which is our top line, which you can see we're right at that max line now, and there's a minimum line, which is here. Usually, if you've gone from the max line and your car is approaching the minimum line, it actually means that it's time to get your brake pads replaced, because that extra fluid is taking up the space that's normally occupied by your brake pads. So if you go from here and down here, have your brakes looked at. Don't just fill this up and ignore the problem. Once it gets down here, you want to fill it up, but then go have it checked. Now, we're going to take a look inside. We know we're at the max level, so we pull this cap off. And this one's probably actually over full here as it's sitting above this filter inside. So you can see how that looks. It's not a bad color. Usually our brake fluid should be clear to slightly amber, so this is okay. So we would mark down that we are at the right level and it's good and does not need servicing. Always make sure your brake cap goes back on. Then we're going to come over here and look at our clutch fluid. Okay. It can be confusing sometimes because brake fluid and clutch fluid are actually the same liquid. And you'll notice on the top of this, it actually says brake fluid. But we know that this little teeny master cylinder here that is not in line with the steering wheel runs our clutch and not our brake system. So the same fluid that you put in the brake master cylinder, you can put in for the clutch fluid as well, if it's low. Okay, so we're going to remove the cap on this, being careful not to drop it, and take a look inside. So you can see it's quite full. If you were to look around the edge, there's actually a rim right here on the edge that is full, and there's another ridge a little bit further down that is the minimum line. This one's all the way at full. Okay, take a look at the fluid. It's a little bit brownish. It could probably stand to be replaced. So I'm going to cover my clutch fluid back up and go mark those off on my sheet. So finally, we said that brake fluid looks good. We said that clutch fluid probably needs to be replaced. Okay, we're going to save the manual transmission fluid for another time, as this has to be, the car has to be put up on jacks or up on a stand and actually have to take the inspection cap off the transmission. So we're going to hang on for that one for another time.